Our latest initiative in combating anti-Semitism is the launch of a full-length documentary called Never Again, which will debut in 800 theaters in October. During this session, we will hear from the film's leading voices, Holocaust survivor Irving Roth and former anti-Israel radical Qasim Hafiz. It will educate viewers on the horrors of the Holocaust and the evils of anti-Semitism, lessons that are sorely needed in our nation. As Pastor Hagee has often said, the rise of worldwide anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem, it is everyone's problem. Now, to dive deeper into this topic, we are privileged to hear from Elan Carr, the State Department's special envoy for monitoring and combating anti-Semitism. In this capacity, Elan is responsible for directing U.S. policies and projects aimed at countering anti-Semitism throughout the world. An officer in the U.S. Army Reserve, he deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he led an anti-terrorism team in life-saving missions throughout the country. He also assisted efforts to establish an independent Iraqi judiciary and trained Iraqi judges and lawyers on constitutional law and criminal defense. Elan is the son of Iraqi Jewish refugees who fled persecution in Iraq. While in Iraq, he met with the remnants of the Jewish community there and led Jewish services in the former presidential palace of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. Please give your attention to Elan Carr.
Thank you so much, Shari. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to join you today for your annual summit. I only wish it could be in person. I was so privileged to attend your leadership summit in San Antonio this past February, and I pray that circumstances will allow us to gather together again soon. To my friend, the amazing Pastor John Hagee, thank you for your remarkable leadership, for your voice of moral clarity, and what a voice it is, and for your vision of an American future rooted in values and in spiritual purpose. You're an inspiration to us all. And finally, to all of you, CUFI leaders and activists and supporters, thank you so much for your wonderful work on behalf of a marvelous cause. We're in your debt. Dear friends, a year and a half ago, I was appointed by President Trump and Secretary Pompeo to lead America's fight against the relentless human sickness that is anti-Semitism. A hatred that transcends boundaries of geography, culture, ideology, time period, and most of all, of logic. Take, for example, the current pandemic. We've seen a tsunami of anti-Semitic hatred on the internet and social media that baselessly blames Jews for, well, you name it, having invented the coronavirus, for intentionally spreading it, profiting from it, or using it as a tool of global control. The only thing new or novel about this absurd allegation is the coronavirus itself. Blaming Jews for the world's maladies has been a standard feature of anti-Semitism for centuries. And when COVID-19 is behind us, God willing, may that be soon, we will be forced to confront the anti-Semitism that feeds off of the economic downturn resulting from this global shutdown. Throughout history, periods of economic pain have almost always seen Jew hatred increase, and not just in words, but in violent acts. We are already seeing anti-Semitic calls railing against so-called Jewish privilege. The economic suffering of many people is very real. Jewish responsibility for it is a pernicious anti-Semitic fiction. These are only the latest flavors of the world's oldest hatred. We're seeing increased anti-Semitism from far-right ethnic supremacists, radical left anti-Zionists, and militant Islamists. This last ideological camp has a main culprit, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the world's chief state sponsor of both terrorism and anti-Semitism. Thank goodness our country no longer enables this rogue regime, as we used to do, but now deters it with punishing sanctions and with a demonstrated ability to use military force when appropriate. Allow me briefly to share with you our critical policy priorities in our global fight against anti-Semitism. We're working with our allies to ensure physical security for their Jewish communities, because physical safety is the most important feature of quality of life. We're encouraging countries to allocate resources toward the investigation, prosecution, and appropriate punishment of hate crimes. We're urging countries to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism, which has been such an important step in understanding the modern manifestations of this ancient disease. We're also urging countries to appoint national anti-Semitism coordinators who can bring focus and resources to our vital fight. We're focused on anti-Semitism on college campuses because, as you well know, the training grounds of our future leaders have often become breeding grounds for anti-Semites. Even some Jews and evangelical Christians are cowering in the face of anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment targeting Israel and its supporters. That's why I'm proud to say that President Trump last December signed an historic executive order that threatens the funding of universities that promote this kind of discrimination and harassment. We're also addressing the problem of internet and online hate, which is the main vehicle used by the far right, the radical left, and militant Islamism to spread hatred throughout the world. I'm the first special envoy to have a senior team member dedicated exclusively to address the problem of internet and online anti-Semitism. And finally, we have another line of effort that I think you're going to like a lot. Most of these measures I've outlined today are inherently defensive, and it's necessary that we defend against hate's onslaught. But as a military officer, I know well that you can't defeat an enemy only by playing defense. So we are determined to go on the offense against anti-Semitism by driving a philo-Semitic narrative, a narrative that inculcates respect and affection for the Jewish people and the values of Judaism that have been so fundamental to our Judeo-Christian heritage and to the founding of our country. Of course, I don't have to tell you how important it is to educate about the values on which our traditions are built. CUFI has been doing that for years, and doing it superbly well. Friends, let me leave you with some very good news. Despite rising anti-Semitism, the United States of America is still the most philo-Semitic country in history. CUFI is one of the reasons that's the case. And today, the United States is led by the most philo-Semitic administration we have ever had. Under the leadership of President Trump, Vice President Pence, my boss, Secretary Pompeo, and so many others, our country is committed to an unprecedented extent to fighting anti-Semitism, to protecting the Jewish people throughout the world, and to supporting the State of Israel. Our commitment to this has never been so clear or so strong. 2 days ago, on Shabbat, in synagogues throughout the world, the Jewish people read the Torah portion of Korach that recounts several tragedies that befell the Israelites in the desert wilderness as they made their way to the Promised Land. At one point, a plague swept their encampment. The people were sick and afraid, and many had died. Moses told his brother Aaron to take fire and incense and go among the people. Aaron did that, and he stood between the living and the dead, and he made his incense offering to the Almighty. It was there and then that the plague stopped. Aaron's act of faith, devotion to God, and love for his brethren brought health back to his people and saved them. Today, our country needs to be restored to health. We need both physical and spiritual health. We need healing of both body and soul. And like in Parashat Korach, we need acts of faith, of devotion, of brotherly love to lift our people toward our great potential. And in this cause, the great cause of crafting a future worthy of America and worthy of our children, I know that we could have no better partner than CUFI. Through your great work, through your unwavering display of faith, devotion, and brotherly love, you remind our country every day about the values that define us, the mission that drives us, and the future that awaits us. May you go from strength to strength. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Elan, for all that you do to combat anti-Semitism worldwide. Now it is my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend of CUFI in his new position as CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, William Daroff. William is known in Washington and throughout the pro-Israel community for his professionalism and ability to build bridges. Please welcome William Daroff.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Sherry. It is an honor to participate in CUFI's annual summit on behalf of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. We have worked closely with you and CUFI for many years, and we cannot thank you enough for your commitment to the cause of Israel. The importance of Christian support for the Jewish state cannot be overstated. For many years, devout Christians across the nation have been the base of America's steadfast support for Israel. With more than 8 million members who all stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and the Jewish people, CUFI is definitively a force to be reckoned with. On behalf of the Conference of Presidents, thank you all for standing up and speaking out for Zion's sake. The Conference of Presidents is the umbrella organization of more than 50 American Jewish organizations from across the religious, political, and ideological spectrums, and the vehicle through which our Jewish community speaks with one voice. As the indispensable Jewish organization, uniquely positioned to represent literally every facet of our community, we play an essential role in endeavoring to present a united front on issues of concern to the Jewish people. Needless to say, a primary focus and concern of the conference is the vital role it plays in the ongoing fight against anti-Semitism, which has become an increasingly urgent issue in America and around the world. In America, long regarded as a safe haven for oppressed Jewish communities that fled the old world for the new, it had been taken for granted for generations that the cancer of anti-Semitism had been excised from the hearts and minds of Americans. There were warning signs when Jewish cemeteries across the country were desecrated and synagogues across the nation were vandalized. Then the Age of Innocence came crashing down in the fall of 2018 when the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history claimed the lives of 11 innocent people who were murdered simply because they were Jewish. The senseless carnage wrought upon the congregants at the Tree of Life Synagogue was not only a blow to the sense of safety and security of the Jewish community of Pittsburgh, but to all American Jews. The spring 2019 attack in Poway, California, reinforced this new reality in America. What followed was an unthinkable spike in hate crimes against the Orthodox community of Brooklyn, where at times several physical and verbal attacks would occur in the span of just 1 week. The fact that Jews would be routinely targeted because of their faith in the center of Jewish life in America, New York City, was beyond belief. Finally, last December, we witnessed a horrific and brutal assault on a Hanukkah gathering in Monsey, New York, which further punctuated the dire stakes for our community. The ADL recently reported that nearly 2 out of 3 American Jews feel less safe today than we did a decade ago. Over 50% of us have experienced some form of anti-Semitism in the past 5 years, and 20% of us have been personally targeted by anti-Semitic comments, slurs, or threats. And these numbers, shocking as they are, do not take into account the anti-Semitic response to COVID-19, which has come from across the political and religious spectrum. For years, American Jews have focused on fighting new anti-Semitism, which has used anti-Zionism as a cover for hatred targeted at Jews. We have poured resources into fighting this threat on campuses and over the internet, while working with local, state, and federal legislatures to shore up support against the delegitimization of Israel. And I might add, we've worked closely with CUFI in those efforts in state capitals and the Capitol here in Washington to endeavor to move forward those efforts. During that time, old anti-Semitism remained semi-dormant, and we had hoped that it would fade into the past. Unfortunately, the events in Pittsburgh and Poway, Brooklyn and Monsey have shaken any faith we had that the old stereotypes had vanished. In COVID-19, we find a striking reemergence of classic anti-Semitic tropes about Jews and plague, drawn directly from the Middle Ages. As my colleague Malcolm Hoenlein says, what was old is new again. While my references to the experiences of the American Jewish community, this phenomena is not limited to our shores. Jews around the world feel more threatened by anti-Semitism. Attacks in Germany and France and Belgium, communal insecurity in South America, anti-Semitic BDS activities on college campuses, as well as the saga of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, clearly demonstrate that anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, is an international epidemic, calling into question the post-Holocaust paradigm of never again. As a society, we cannot accept this as the new status quo. We must learn from these tragedies and work to prevent further incidents. When anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, words and condolences are not enough. In order to fight it, we need an organized, unified response. There must be action from all sectors of government and society. We must ensure that the response comes not just from Jews, but from non-Jewish leaders and influential people the world over. We should not be alone in the fight against the world's oldest hatred, but coming together, I am certain we can neutralize it. Thank you again for this opportunity to address the summit today. I look forward to next year when we can celebrate here in person in Washington or, God willing, in Yerushalayim. The conference.
I want to thank you all for joining us for the movie panel, Never Again. As you know, CUFI members, making film is nothing new to CUFI. With the Mizrahi Project and Israel Collective, we've been making films for years because we understand the power of film and the ability for a message to meet people where they are. Some people may not ever come to a CUFI event. Some people may never walk into a church, but they may go see a movie. So it is with great pride and joy that I am joined by Irving Roth, Kasim Hafiz, and we are here to talk about CUFI's first feature-length film, Never Again, the movie. This is coming to theaters October 2020. It is a docudrama featuring both of these gentlemen here. And what we're going to do here is just kind of have a little bit of behind the scenes and let you guys hear from the stars of the film what it was like to make this film. So Irving, let me start with you. I know that you and I was blessed to go to Poland with the CUFI group last year. And I was going just as a participant. And even though I knew your story and I had heard it so many times, hearing you retell your story in Poland, at Auschwitz, marching through the footsteps that you had gone through, and you said this phrase that will stay with me till the day that I die. You said, "It began with words." And automatically I knew that it was very important for CUFI to do a better job of capturing this message that you have dedicated your life to spreading. And so talk to us a little bit about why, even though you have gone to hundreds of universities, hundreds of churches, and you have given this message for decades, why was it important for you now to make this film with CUFI?
The movie itself is very important from a number of perspectives. One of them, as you pointed out, the whole issue of words. And we use a lot of words. To realize that it all began with words and how the words transformed into actions. And from there, of course, the murder of 6 million Jews, my grandfather and grandmother. And to stand, I want people to come and stand with me beside the railroad tracks in Auschwitz, where this horrendous event took place for me. I want them to join me in that moment, in that place. And if they cannot come with me, let them at least see it on film as I am there standing. Similarly, there are other pieces to it. One of the things we did is we went to my hometown where I grew up. Now, the town itself, the city itself, is now 5 times the size. Yet some of the basic structures and moments of my life there are still there. I had the opportunity to go to my school. Now, it's a new building, but on the same place. And I was able to speak to the great-grandchildren of my classmates, to the grandchildren of those who actually were involved in getting me not to be allowed to go to the beach, play soccer, go shopping anytime during the day, except for between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. And eventually I had to leave because of I want people to join me in that. And for me to speak to these students and see their reaction, it's critical to see how they're affected by it. Because it was their grandparents who committed these heinous crimes.
Irving, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the first time that you had been back to your boyhood home since you were an adolescent. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Wow. And what was that like for you to come back to that place, in essence, victorious, in essence, just the victor? You have conquered so much, and you have so much strength. What was that like for you to revisit that place that the last time you were there, it was quite the opposite?
It was totally the opposite, of course. Looking at the structures, that was one part. Look at the railroad station, which played a great role in my life. And one of the things which was most interesting, we went to see the mayor of the town. I was invited to see the mayor. And that was kind of exciting because 75, 80 years ago, the structure of the town was such that the mayor and the police wanted me out, wanted me dead. They wanted me and my parents and all the Jews of the town, all 2,000 Jews or so, to disappear. And in fact, they participated in putting the Jews into trains and get rid of them. They lived in our houses. They took over our businesses. And to be greeted by the mayor with open arms.
Wow.
It was really another transformation in a way. That the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of those people who committed this crime, who were so mean to me, now embraced me. In fact, when I finished speaking to the students who are 15, 16-year-olds, and at first they were kind of shy in a way because they weren't quite sure what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. But at the end of it, each one of them wanted to at least shake hands, touch me. Many of them wanted to hug me. There was an empathy and a relationship, and almost saying to themselves, like, how could my grandparents have done this? What was wrong with them? And as I told them, they listened to the propaganda. They listen to the lies. So what I want people to do is go and see it and experience with me both the transformation from a perfectly wonderful, pleasant, exciting life of a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old to the Holocaust in Auschwitz and coming back 8 centuries later and be greeted. That a transformation is possible. Tshuva, repentance is possible.
Yeah.
We can create a better world. It's up to us.
Yes, and if we've made this film and don't leave with that sense of hope, the hope that we can do better, the hope that together, that there is more to be done, which is why we also wanted to include Kasim in the film. Most of our CUFI members know, for those of you that don't, Kasim and Irving have a relationship longer than a decade now, and they have gone to, I would say, hundreds of campuses by now and churches, and shared both of their stories, different parallels about the power of transformation. And so not only is this documentary retrospective, looking at Irving's life and what he's overcome and been through, but also Kasim was so generous to allow us to look a little bit deeper into his story and learn about the power of his transformation. And Kasim, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about when you were approached about doing this film, you know, just kind of the gravity of the decision that you had to make and letting all of us in on that journey with you.
No, for sure. So initially when it was discussed and you guys were all talking about, we're going to make a movie about Irving, I was like, great. Like, I love Irving. This is going to be so important. And then there was like, and we want you to be in it. And that's kind of when I was like, okay, let's pump the brakes. Hold on a minute. And it's for a number of reasons. One, there is this aspect where, you know, I love what I do. I am committed to what I do. And I didn't want to take away from Irving's story. It's so, because we have very different journeys, and it's interesting how they've intersected. But for me, I was seeing it from this perspective that here is somebody that even today, after years of knowing Irving, I can't fathom what he endured and how he is the person he is. Anyone who's spent any time with Irving will probably tell you the same thing. So there was the one, I didn't want to take away from that at all. And two, there's almost this idea of, okay, that was my past, and I've moved on from that almost. There's this idea that that's what I did, and that's who I was, and I talk about it and I share it, but I've moved on from it. It's in the past rather than it's something I want to revisit.
That makes sense, because it was a heavy lift, because we also, speaking of going back to childhood homes, we also asked you to revisit the place of your childhood, which is a place that you hadn't been for some years, kind of for very different reasons. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
No, definitely. So going back to the UK, so it's really difficult because I have such mixed feelings about where I grew up. On the one hand, it is where I grew up and I have so many great experiences of all these things. And then, at 24, 25, this place which I called home and where I belong turned. It flipped and became hostile to me. And it's to walk those same streets that on the one hand provided me so much kind of happy memories, and then for the last few years of my life in England were where I was constantly watching my own back, where people were coming up to me and calling me a traitor or whatever. So on the one hand there's that, and secondly, it's where my family are, who I have a strained relationship with, and it's revisiting that, which isn't easy because it's still all these situations, the tensions with people in my family, the tensions in my community still exist. Just because I moved, they didn't go away. So there was this heightened sense of, I don't know if I'd say of uncomfortability, and just this idea that this could escalate very quickly. Just me walking down the street. So it was difficult, but one of the things when I I talked about it with various people was that the intersecting of the two stories, for me, my part in this is to further emphasize Irving's story. It's to further, and because Irving has played such a huge part in my life. Yeah, and we discussed that in the film, and again, these are things that people just don't know. It's not things I generally talk about, but it was appropriate to share at this point.
And I understand your point in terms of, not wanting to detract from the power of Irving's message, because of course it stands on its own. But I think that your willingness, Kasim, to allow us to look at this issue from a modern perspective, not something that happened 75 years ago, something that happened essentially present day, even though it was in your recent past, to see the power of words now, the power that they had to transform you from something that you did not want to be into what you are today, and to show people that merely standing with the Jews, supporting the nation of Israel for somebody with your past brings on a similar hatred from the people in your own community. That it's not without risk that you made this transformation personally yourself. And to point that out, I don't think takes away from, of course, what Irving went through. That's a singular horror in itself and not to be replicated. But without, I think, showing your perspective of how this same evil, the evil of anti-Semitism, still exists today, despite the fact that the concentration camps are closed, is very important, because people don't need to look at this as a historical issue, as merely a retrospective of what happened. People have to come see this film and be educated, again, education is everything, with the fact that this is still happening today. There's anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. I know both of you gentlemen, when we were talking about making this film, that's what we were talking about, that we have to educate people about the anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. Just in the few months that it took for us to make this film, there was no more hiding. It wasn't an old hatred wearing a new mask. The mask had fallen off, and people were being attacked in their synagogues, and people were being attacked at their Passover celebrations. And so, Irving, just from your perspective, because again, you have walked this road, how has it been for you seeing that just in the amount of time that it has taken us to produce this film, that so much has changed, that you see on the news, that you see on the media, that so much has escalated? In your book, you talk about how you educated your uncle when he was trying to say, things will get better. I want to believe those people that are trying to help us. And you just kept pointing to your gold star pinned on your chest. And you were saying, no, trust me. I've seen it. I've been there. Trust me. How do you feel now, just seeing how things have escalated in the few months since we've produced this film?
Let me begin by saying I think that putting Kasim into the movie is very important, because it shows the flip side of what you can do with words.
Okay.
That words have the ability to create the most evil, but they also can create a new vision, a possibility that a better day can come. We can do it using words appropriately. And I think it's extremely important to do it now because of anti-Semitism, because words are necessary to direct people to the truth. It's so critical that we understand that it's possible to take the evil of anti-Semitism and by appropriate words, by presenting the truth in its raw form, even those people who today are convinced that anti-Semitism is an appropriate way to go against the Jewish people today, hopefully they realize, once they're exposed to these words, they suddenly realize, let me look at them more carefully. And here is an example of this tremendous transformation which took place, taking a young man who was totally subsumed by evil, totally subsumed by the idea, destruction and terrorism and murder and elimination is a religious undertaking. For him to see that truth and come back is an extremely important piece of this whole story. So we can do it both. We can create evil or we can create good. And so the objective is to listen to people's words and see, are they pointing in the direction of positive improvement for humanity? Or is the ultimate objective the destruction? And I think those two things are shown. I hope people will realize what this film is all about.
That's right. That's right. And Kasim, a question to you, just in the amount of time that's passed since we've made this film and how the trajectory of the situation has just escalated and not for the better. I know you've lived all over the world, including, the United Kingdom and Canada. And for so long, I think that Americans felt insulated against this type of vitriol and this type of hate. And they saw it as something that was really problematic in other countries, but they didn't expect to see the evil of anti-Semitism, the fire of that virus burning so incessantly within our own borders. So for someone in your position that has immigrated to America and lives here now, and you see how this is creeping, infiltrating our nation now, what do you say to that? And did that have an motivation on your wanting to participate in this project?
No, definitely. So that had an impact because I feel, so, I mean, I have the American, but like, that is there all the time. The American, it's not a prop just for this. Like, I love this country, and it saddens me. And there's this horrible moment seeing this parallel of what I saw in the United Kingdom, and with anti-Semitism, almost like with any kind of evil, it doesn't just come in one day rolling on a truck going, "Hey, the anti-Semites are here." It's gradual. There's little hurdles and little steps that come. It almost creeps in, and then people fall asleep at the wheel because it's not in their face, because they're not seeing what they are seeing now 6 months ago or a year ago. It's almost ignored. There's always this attitude that, well, it could be worse, or at least we're not this country, or at least we're not in the situation in Europe. And that is the worst possible mentality to get into, because it's that mentality which makes you think everything is fine, so you don't see the signposts on the way. And Irving has said it numerous times. He calls them the signposts to Auschwitz, I believe. And it is, you don't see the signposts which are leading to this essential disaster. And, you know, they say prevention is better than cure. And we're in a situation where we have time to prevent this.
Yeah.
It's spreading and it's dangerous. And, you know, seeing those signs, seeing what I saw in the UK, this, I believe, could be a huge step, a huge element in trying to, I don't say wake people up to insult anybody, but to wake people up to the reality, to get them to go from, well, this is bad, but it won't get this bad, to go, look, this is the situation and nobody is immune from this evil, and you are the solution. You can make the difference.
Irving, Kasim talked about the signposts of Auschwitz, and I know that when we were talking about making this film as a group, somebody said, you know, just because the furnace of Auschwitz isn't on and isn't burning doesn't mean that never again is a reality. And to Kasim's point, because the Holocaust isn't happening, people think that we're good. People think that we're okay. But you've been here before, and you've seen the insidious nature of this hatred. And Kasim uses words like virus and cure. And I think because virus and pandemic are on everybody's mind these days, of course, right? That anti-Semitism is a virus, in that if you are not actively fighting it, then it is beating you, whether you know it or not. And if you are not actively fighting it, then by the time you acknowledge that it's there, it could have overtaken so much more than it ever needed to. So if you could, Irving, a little bit, talking about those signposts, what are some of the things that you're seeing right now that you have seen before?
For instance, one of the things I have seen before is the newspaper in the 1930s, all the way through. And the newspaper had articles about Jews, how evil they are, what specific things they do, how evil, how destructive they are. And in fact, in Germany, the Stürmer, that particular newspaper, had on the bottom of it saying, the Jews are our misfortune. Fast forward to the evaluation of today, 20% of the British people are convinced that it was the Jews that brought it upon Great Britain and Europe and America. I mean, that was a bizarre idea. Exactly the same thing. The Jews were responsible for World War I and World War II and depression and inflation. And here we are in 2020 on the internet, in the newspapers. The Jews are responsible. An organization that should be worrying about the pandemic, organization that should be trying to help humanity, are busy hating Israel, hating the Jewish people. Right now, while we're fighting the pandemic throughout the world, the International Criminal Court is worrying and trying to convince each other and the world that when Israel fought the war in Gaza in 2014, they committed war crimes. That's their major objective, to prove that the Jews committed war crimes. A country and a IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, who go beyond what anybody else has ever done in terms of telling civilians, get out of the way.
Yeah.
During the war, before they bombed a building, and the reason they bombed it is to get rid of the ammunition, the missiles in that particular building. They call them on the cell phone, say, get out of there because we're going to blow up the missiles. Did we send during World War II to the people of Dresden that we're going to firebomb them? Inappropriate. Yet at the same time, the people of the world are not paying attention. They're worrying about that, the International Criminal Court. Simultaneously, you have a country like Iran that is, sadly, the people are suffering from this pandemic. What is their main concern? Let's build more accurate ammunition so we can destroy Tel Aviv and the Jews with it. The insanity of it, the evil of it, is happening today. And unless we actively do something about it, we need to present the facts to the people of the United States, particularly on the college campus, because the college campus of today will be running this country in 20 years. When my great-grandchildren are living here, hopefully, in 20 years, they'll be 25, 30 years old. Will they have to wear a yellow star in America? If we do not stop it, we will have a dictatorship where persecution of the other will be not only legal, it will be patriotism.
Right, because of the power of words, all because
Absolutely.
and lack of education. Kasim, Irving talked about the college campuses, and you know better than anybody that that's a front line in this battle. Why don't you share with us just briefly one or some of the experiences that you've had on college campuses when you go to share your story, how you're received there when you want to share your journey and your transformation.
So it's really interesting, the college campus, for a number of reasons. One, because it's meant to be the place where people are willing to exchange ideas and have respectful dialogue and all these things. Or maybe I just watched, too much TV about American college campuses in the UK, maybe.
Yeah.
But, I've spoken at campuses where I've not even said anything. I'll give you actually an example, a recent example. I spoke at a college campus in Missouri, Mizzou, and I'm walking up to the building, and and this is important, and I don't bring this up just, there are 3 white students, okay, literally the stereotype of the hipster student, holding up a sign saying, no Islamophobia or racism on our campus, boycott Kasim. So I was like, okay. So I literally walk up to them and I was like, so what's happening, guys? They're like, yeah, we've got this really racist speaker coming to campus today, and he's like going to be spreading hate, and our campus is inclusive for everyone. I went, wow, and what's he talking about? He's talking about, how he hates Muslims and about Israel. I was like, wow, that's I went, do you have any quotes or anything? So like I can, find out what this guy's about. And they're like, well, if you look, you can find them. But guy, you guys just say like, I want to know more about this guy, and they kind of like, well, and then eventually they're like, well, we've got to stay protesting. So I was like, okay, cool. So I went and did my event, and there were people in that event who had opposing views, and so it started off a little tense because somebody tried to interrupt, and I was like, look, here's the deal. You want to interrupt, this is going to be a really unpleasant evening for you. If you want to wait and ask questions at the end, cool. And he did. Like, to his credit, he stayed, he asked questions, and it turned into actually a respectful dialogue. That isn't always the case. You have people, I've had examples of people screaming at me, like I've not even said a word, and they just do not want to hear. Or you have these mass walkouts, which are just done for, I guess, social media stunts.
Kind of.
Yeah, and it's like,
at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
And despite the, bastions of higher learning supposed to be where you can have intellectual discourse and reasonable minds are allowed to differ, that's not always the case, especially when it comes to talking about Israel and anti-Semitism. And the tragedy of it all is that you really have something very important to say, because you did have their views to the extreme, to the radical extreme. And that's why it was so important for you to participate in this film, because you've been on the other side, and people need to see that change is possible. People don't need to feel that this is an intractable situation without any solution, and that there's a stalemate, that this fight has been going on for centuries and that there is nothing that can be done, because that's just not true. Yeah. And this film gives people that hope. Irving, with that in mind, what do you want people to walk away after they've seen this film and they've seen your story and Kasim's story? And yes, they're different, but they also intersect. What do you want them to walk away with?
I want them to know what happened, how the words that were written already in the late 19th century were converted to action, and the step-by-step process, and the fact that it's possible to change. And I want them to become active, meaning that they to understand what the issues really are, and not take on, just because someone said it, it now becomes gospel. To understand the history, to study it sufficiently and be able to confront evil, and so that ordinary people who are not concerned or not involved and are truly bystanders can cause a lot of damage. And it's important I hope what people do is think about what happened, what's possible. And that's the important piece, what's possible.
That's right.
And express that possibility in clear terms to their friends, to their neighbors, and to their children and grandchildren and generations to come. Because we can create. Man is capable of creating the most perfect union.
Yeah.
It says so in some place. To create a more perfect union. We can't do that. We're capable of it.
That's right.
And I hope people are pushed into that direction.
Mo, you said you want them to take action. It takes work. Anything worth having takes work. It has to be nurtured. It's not going to happen on its own. And so, Kasim, I'll take that same question to you. I know you've spent a lot of time on this film. You and Irving have spent months traveling all over the world to make it, and it'll be in theaters soon, October 2020. After people walk away from this film, what do you want them to take with them?
So there's a number of things. One of the things which should resonate, should really touch their heart and also spur them into action before they've even seen the film, is to hear Irving say, "Will my grandchildren have to wear a gold star in America?" Like, if that doesn't impact you, then there's an issue there. And essentially, the film is, I believe, not the first, but a huge step in taking this conversation forward and taking this conversation into action. You are going to see and experience things which you probably haven't seen or experienced before. Like, even for me, growing up in the UK with a secular education, I didn't know any Holocaust survivors. I knew the Holocaust happened, but it was kind of it's part of history. Here you're walking those steps with somebody who survived it, endured it, and is seeing what's happening today. You're going to see how corrosive words are and how destructive they can be, but you're also going to see how words can change hearts and minds and how they can build a better future, and how we have a choice. We either sit on the sidelines and we have these huge statements, and we say all these things and post whatever on social media, but the team sitting in the sidelines doesn't win no matter how loud you cheer. You've got to get onto the field, and hopefully, my hope is, and I genuinely believe that when somebody sees this film, they're going to want to get on the field and make sure that never again is a promise, not just a slogan. And if they are on the other side of the spectrum, I believe that it can cause a crack. It can bring a little bit of light of truth into that darkness of falsehood, and hopefully bring about a change similar to what I experienced.
That's right. Irving, this whole movie started because you said the words and they never left my brain. It began with words. And you said in this interview that words have the power to create evil or to create good. And you and Kasim have taken your stories and you have created good. You have shined a light on the evil of anti-Semitism. The Bible tells us that light conquers darkness. Light and darkness cannot coexist. So when the darkness becomes great, do not fret, but shine your light. And that is what we are doing with this film, Never Again. And we are going to motivate and we are going to activate people in ways I'm believing that we never have before. I think Christians United for Israel as an organization is proof that change is possible. We have 8 million members, Christians and Jews standing together, shoulder to shoulder, united in fighting this fight. And 70 years ago, that was not the case. And I am believing that as movie theaters open up this fall and people are starting to come out of their homes from the pandemic after practicing physical distancing and all of these things, that the most beautiful sight that we can hope for is for people across religions, across race, across creed, belief systems, and ideologies, standing shoulder to shoulder, wanting to learn more about this issue, wanting to see how they can become involved, to become active, to become interveners, not to cry about the darkness in the world, but to see how they can become a part of the solution and to see how we can all together shine the light. Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this panel. Thank you so much. We are eternally grateful that you lent your voices and your stories to create this film. For those of you watching this panel and want to learn more about how you can be involved, whether you want to host a screening at your church, whether you want to host a screening at a theater in your town, please go to neveragainthemovie.com to find out how you can learn more to do that. It's coming out in theaters October 2020. Enjoy the trailer. We're going to play it for you now. Thank you.
It all begins with words uttered by individuals, repeated by others, and became a philosophy, an ideology.
When you become anything without realizing that it's happening, it's called brainwash.
hated America. The Jews were the reason for all the evil in the world.
This we must not allow to happen again.